everyone, welcome back to our place. We are so excited to welcome back Sarah Erdman from Summit's Edge Counseling, and even more excited to welcome Katherine Penuela, who also is from Summit's Edge Counseling today. Sarah was kind enough to introduce me to Katherine, and we thought it would be great to continue our conversation around therapy. When Sarah and I talked last, we talked a lot about what therapy looks like, the benefits. She works specifically with kids who have disabilities, so go check out her interview if you haven't seen it yet. And as we have launched our parenting series, Katherine is going to focus a little bit on what counseling looks like for couples. So thank you, ladies, for joining us.
For sure.
So, Katherine, let's start a little bit by just talking about counseling for couples. Sarah walked us through what that looks like for kids, and it probably looks a little different for couples.
For sure. Yes. So it usually starts with an intake, right? Just having both couples hear a little bit about their story, how they met, where they're at, what's going on in regards to the relationship, their family dynamics, right? They have children, especially. How is that affecting the relationship? What has changed, right? What's heavier, what's lighter? And I usually try to see also couples individually as well. I want to be able to hear also their narrative, right? What's going on with them individual as a person, and how is that impacting the relationship? So it's very much like breaking down like that, seeing them together individually, and then we come together, and then we just set out the grounds of goals and expectations, and then we start working day by day, very hands-on in my therapy room.
Yeah,
we work on skills right there and then.
That's great. So tell us a little bit about if you are a couple married, in a relationship, whatever that looks like. What are some reasons that you would maybe advise people to start counseling? I mean, I always say, always get counseling. There doesn't have to be a reason.
Yes, I like that. I really like the answer. But all the red flags perhaps are things that to look out, right? If you're trying to communicate with your husband or your partner, right? And you're not fully feeling like you're being understood, or perhaps they're misunderstanding what you're saying, or constantly arguments, or you feel a little bit irritable, right? When they're around, when they're talking, right? Those are good signs to come to therapy, right?
Yeah.
Even if you guys are thinking of coming together, right? I think that's also a good point to start therapy.
Yeah. So Sarah, you work with families, and you work specifically with the kids. So do you usually will you advise parents of the kids that you're working with, like, hey, we have, it might be good for you to get into counseling too, because you have an insight as to what's going on in the side of the kids.
Absolutely. So children are delightfully unfiltered. And that means that usually I know a lot more than a lot of parents and caregivers liked their child's therapist to know.
Yeah.
And so usually when I do intake, I like to at least ask if, okay, one or more parents or caregivers, I always say, like, are you in therapy yourself? Is that something that you're interested in? Because more often than not, the more we get into the child's deeper thinking, their kind of adaptability, their regulation skills, we learn that there are more factors at play. And usually by targeting the family unit, we can help kind of, first of all, increase a sense of community, erase any kind of stigma that the child feels in therapy. And it's a much more kind of foundational knowledge, because it's very often a child will come in experiencing anxiety, maybe some symptoms of depression, and it's coming from mom, it's coming from dad, it's coming from grandma, and it's been kind of undiagnosed, untreated, unsaid, and unspoken. And so I always like to tell parents and families, I always recommend it. I know, especially for parents of kiddos with disabilities, it feels like a lot.
Yeah.
But having that 360 family systems approach, it's so helpful, and it really does create very secure bonds as everyone works through that together.
Yeah. So if it's, because I know we talk, especially for parents who have kids with disabilities, there is 10 million things on their plate. And so, and mainly their focus is probably their child being in therapy, getting in that occupational therapy and stuff. So how would you tell parents to maybe like take a step back and also realize, them being in therapy and couples counseling benefits their child in ways too. And so tell us a little bit about what that looks like. Sarah, Catherine, I don't know which one of you wants to answer.
I usually say, like, imagine your family as a system or as a tree, right? If the roots are not solid, healthy, strong, then the tree is going to start looking very weak. It's going to weaken. It's not going to give fruit. So you need to have those roots very strong. And you as a couple have the strong roots of that tree to make sure your kids have the support and the love and the connection that they need from you, because you're calm, you're grounded, you're taking care of yourself. So you have the bandwidth to be the parent that your child needs.
Yeah.
I usually put it with the parents.
Yeah. So, Catherine, when you're working with parents who specifically have a child with disabilities, are you working on skills not only within the dynamic of the couple, but also, how to work with your child possibly? Like, Sarah, if you're working with the child, will you guys kind of coordinate together what therapy can look like in both senses?
So I think the cool thing about our practice specifically is that everyone is so different. I know I talked about this in our last interview too. So for example, like if I saw the child and Catherine saw the couple, we could have them sign a release of information so we could talk to each other. And then we don't like to share like very in-depth notes at all, but common themes. Because if I go to Catherine and I'm like, hey, this child is experiencing a lot of anxiety, and all of a sudden Catherine says, absolutely, there was a rupture in the marriage. It makes a lot of sense. And it helps me as the child's therapist give the child more kind of coping skills and also better perspective so that I know it's not a deeper clinical issue and that maybe just by environmental factors too.
Yeah. So another thing that we were all talking about actually before we even started this interview is, and Sarah, you brought it up, if a parent loses a child, I mean, it's always the first piece of advice probably is go into counseling, go into grief counseling, join a support group. But if a parent, it goes through the diagnosis of a child with disability, Sarah, the first thing that you wrote in your article on our website, Diagnose Now What, is rest and process, right? And so it's not really the first thing you hear going through a diagnosis, and it's similar. So talk to us a little bit about parents who might have just been going through that diagnosis phase and where they should start by looking for a counselor, things that you're going to be able to help them with, Catherine, and what those first maybe few sessions look like.
So the first session perhaps is just kind of getting where they're at in regards to their relationship itself, right? And in the individual sessions, that's where I usually start asking the questions of like, where were you when you found out? Where was it? How was the process? Did you allow yourself to be in that moment and really experience the grief that comes with it, right? And then engage where the couple is individually and then come together and actually tell them that you guys are very similar, right? In regards to that grief. And you guys are feeling so alone at this moment, but together. Let's take care of the loneliness for 1 second and come together and join of the grief. So talk about grief, but also reframing your expectations, right? Expectations of perhaps I would dream of wanting to do X, Y, and Z with my kid. How does that feel? Where does that feel in your body, right? And then turn to your partner and saying that. I feel so sad. And I usually try to remove shame, judgment, right, from the couple, because it's very important in these vulnerable places to be acceptant, to be in the moment and say, I know it's hard for me too. I had the dream. It's going to share the dreams that both of you guys had. They're no longer going to be. And as we hold space for that, then whenever they're ready, then moving forward, how can we adjust our expectations to something that actually can happen, right? Usually they say, well, I just want to spend time with my kids. So how that can look like right now in your relationship, how does your family can look like. So I really slow the conversation down with the couple.
That sounds nice. I mean, just like taking a step back. I mean, I want to go see Catherine now.
I'm sure, for sure. Yes, Megan.
So the other thing we talk about in this community is, oh my gosh, everything is finding services is so hard, whether that is a barber shop, a dentist. Sarah, we talked about it's hard to find a therapist that specializes in kids with disabilities, which hopefully we're changing with the map. Sarah's on our map. Your guys' office is on the Our Places map. Check it out. But when it comes to working with couples who have a child with disabilities, are you looking for something as specialized, or is it really like any couples counselor? How would they go about finding help?
Mhm. Well, I usually recommend anybody who's trained EFT, emotional focused therapy, right? That's very essential, right? I usually try to look for that or recommend to look for that. But also IFS, internal family system, is also a great thing for therapists who are working with couples that have a child with disability to know and be trained. So those are the two things that I usually have recommend. But I think that any couple therapists are able to slow down the conversations and really try to go into what's the hurt, what's going on within the relationship.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So Sarah, I want to shift back a little bit. So if you give you a scenario here. So if you're a parent and you're seeing their child, and maybe you go, the parents could probably benefit from seeing a therapist or a couples therapist. Probably the gut instinct of a parent is, why is she telling me I need to go to therapy? So if you're a parent that is getting that piece of advice, what would you say to those people to make it not come across like, don't take it as something offensive?
Oh my gosh. So I have this conversation with parents on probably a weekly basis at this point. And it's quite honestly one of my favorite conversations to have. One, because it's not had enough, and two, because it feels very human. It's not like very clinical or white coat or anything. So I kind of start by getting kind of a temperature check on how the parent is feeling. And if the parent feels like very data driven, so they're like, I want to know a black and white diagnosis, I want to know what interventions you're using, I usually kind of circle back to, okay, if this was a broken bone, you would be following up with the doctor, you'd go to ortho.
Right. Yeah.
So if something's happening in your family system and at home, our bone is still fractured a little bit, there's nothing wrong with that, but you deserve the space to go mend it and to do whatever you need to do to make it whole again. And so I like to honestly acknowledge that it is an incredibly normal reaction to have, and they are worth as much space as their child is. And then on the other end of that, I always, oh my gosh, the parents I work with are probably tired of me referencing this like TED talk before, but there's a really beautiful TED talk about when you're on an airplane and the safety manual says you have to put your mask on first before putting it on other people. And that includes your child. And parents always go a little bit wild when they hear that. But I always say, like, you're pouring out of an empty cup right now.
Yeah.
You deserve to fill that fullness. Your child deserves to fill that fullness. And like Katherine is saying, in the family system, it's more healing all around. And so I like to kind of work to erase some of that shame and that stigma. And like Katherine was saying, again, like slowing the conversation down of being like, hey, I noticed you just had a reaction to this. Please know that seeking therapy services doesn't make you a less than parent, doesn't make you a less than person. If anything, it'll enhance your strengths and we can add to them.
Yeah.
So I like, again, it's slowing down that conversation, affirming wherever they're at, and then explaining what it can do for them in the long term, because especially if they have a kiddo with disabilities, they're going to want to know why they have to make time for this.
Yeah. So I think too, a lot of people, so you go, okay, I'm going to go to therapy, and they think I'm going to be going to therapy forever. And that's not always the case. I mean, maybe for the child with disabilities, because I could see where that would be beneficial for throughout their life. But so when it comes to couples, tell us a little bit, like, it's not a situation where you're in therapy forever. So Katherine, what does that look like? Like, do they set goals? Do you set time frames? What does that look like?
So we set goals, correct. So after our fourth session, right, we come together and we're like, okay, guys, so these are your strengths. I always start with the strength. Here's your strength, right? Because those are going to be the ones we can use to be able to expand on the areas that we need improvement, right? So we use the strength to be able to create goals on the areas of improvement. And then the couples give me feedback, and if that works, it doesn't work. And then as we have the goal, then I usually tell them, okay, we're going to revisit these goals in 3 months. Okay. And we're going to see where we are. And we're going to kind of grade it from 0 to 10. Where are we, right? 0 representing that's the day when you get started therapy, and 10 where we want to be. Where are we? And then they usually say, we're at 2, Katherine, or 3. So I'll say, okay, perfect. So what does a 4 look like? Or what does a 3.5 look like for the next 3 months, right? Or whatever time that we set for that time. And usually couples they do the homework, right? They give in the work, then they usually say, Katherine, they get to a point like, you know what? We're doing great. Or start noticing they actually answer their own questions, and they do their own therapy in the room. And I'm like, you guys are doing great. Let's just think about pushing our session once a month, every 2 months. Let's do every 3. And then I just do a little checkup and see how we're doing. And then it always goes well. It doesn't have to be for life, for sure.
Yeah. And it's like too, you can always have the check-ins if you need. I mean, a lot of things get thrown at you and a lot of changes throughout your life. So I think that's great. And that's always so important, especially because therapy can be expensive. I mean, it's covered by insurance, but people are also going, I can't, afford to do this for, the rest of my life. Yes. So there are some, I think, again, in this community, Sarah, like you said, a lot of these parents are very data driven. Numbers are always thrown at them. This percent, this percent, this percent, this. And I actually spoke to a mom a few weeks ago that her child was diagnosed. And the first thing they told her is, this percentage of marriages and this and this and this. So, those are just numbers. And so I would love for you guys, and maybe both of you, to make a comment on this, how not to latch on to those scary statistics and go, that's going to be me because the number is high. Sarah, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think that's honestly a very normal and natural reaction to hearing that. And so I know, like, for me as a human being and as a therapist, I always like to kind of walk alongside people of knowing that, one, that's a very human experience to have that. But I like to process a little bit deeper of like, okay, you heard that statistic. What is your reaction? Is it anger because you feel defensive of a fraction that's already there? Is it fear or sadness out of losing that connection with your partner? And that's kind of where I like to start with, kind of giving them those referrals, helping them in the moment of saying, okay, I know this number is scary. Whatever your reaction, it's your gut or wherever you're feeling it in your body is talking to you. And that's worth listening to, whether your body's telling you, I don't want to lose my person or the system, or it's saying, hold on, I think like my check engine light is on in terms of my relationship. So that's how I like to reframe it in that way.
Yeah, I love that. Katherine, what about you?
I think just like to be able to, to use it more like in this is a great moment for me to reflect. Not to think about like, oh my God, this is going to happen to me, but almost like reflect. Use this information to reflect. Okay, but where are we at as a couple, right? And where will we want to be as a couple? And it sounds like what we want to get there. And it sounds like we need extra skills that we're not taught in school, or we don't get from our family origins, that we actually have to be mindful and purposeful in learning it. So being mindful in regards to like, okay, so maybe we need these type of skills in place to move forward. So using it more like a checklist. Okay, so I think we need to go and find a way to learn these skills or expand our skills so we can be who we want to be.
Yeah. And a message to medical providers, maybe don't give that statistic the first time you're meeting families. Just scares them even more than they already are. So, and if you are going to give that number, refer them to a good therapist like Katherine and Sarah. Well, Katherine and Sarah, thank you guys so much. I know we wanted to touch a little bit. I'm so happy that we got to cover therapy for kids, and Katherine, you educating us on therapy for couples. We'll kind of see where we go next with this therapy series. I feel like people keep popping up with things regarding different types of therapy, which is great. We're getting the conversation going. Don't forget to register at our place to tell us what your 3 needs are right now, so we can reach out and help you guys get through those. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.